The arid landscape of New Mexico territory stretched before Thomas Blackwood like an endless sea of dust and rock as his stagecoach rattled along the rutted trail. The year was 1889, and Blackwood, a reporter for the Chicago Tribune, had traveled west to investigate rumors of strange occurrences in a remote valley where the Cordero family had established their homestead some 15 years prior. "You'd be wise to turn back, mister," the driver called over his shoulder, his voice nearly lost to the howling wind that swept across the barren terrain. "Ain't nothing in that valley but trouble." Blackwood adjusted his spectacles and gazed out at the distant mountains. "Trouble is precisely what I'm here to write about," he replied, clutching his leather journal tighter. The sun hung low in the western sky, casting long shadows across the landscape as they approached the small settlement of Tierra Seca, little more than a collection of wooden structures surrounding a dusty main street. The town appeared almost deserted as the stagecoach rolled to a stop outside the only establishment that showed signs of life, a saloon called the Broken Spoke. "This is as far as I go," the driver said firmly. "If you're dead set on reaching Cordero Valley, you'll need to hire a local guide. No one else will take you." Blackwood nodded, gathering his belongings. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, despite the dryness. He could feel eyes watching him from behind dusty windows as he made his way toward the saloon. Inside, conversation ceased immediately as he entered. A dozen weathered faces turned to regard the stranger with expressions ranging from curiosity to open hostility. "I'm looking for someone who can guide me to the Cordero Valley," Blackwood announced, setting his bags down beside a worn wooden chair. An older man at the bar let out a bitter laugh. "Then you're looking for a fool, stranger. Or a dead man." Blackwood took a seat, ordering whiskey from the bartender, who regarded him with suspicious eyes. "I've heard stories," he said, "about what happened to the family. I'm here to document the truth." "Truth," spat a man from the corner. "There ain't no truth to be found in that place. Just death." The bartender leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. 7 people vanished without a trace. The only one they ever found was the youngest boy, and the man crossed himself. "He ain't been right since. Doesn't speak. Just draws pictures of the darkness, he says, lives under the valley." "Where can I find him?" Blackwood asked, his journalistic instincts piqued. A woman's voice responded from the doorway. "My brother doesn't see visitors." Blackwood turned to see a woman in her early 30s, dressed in practical frontier clothing, her dark hair pulled back severely from a face that might once have been beautiful if not for the hardness that had settled into its features. "Elena Cordero," she said, extending no hand in greeting. "And you're making a mistake coming here, mister?" "Blackwood. Thomas Blackwood, Chicago Tribune." Her eyes narrowed. "A reporter. Of course." She moved to leave, but Blackwood rose quickly. "Please, Miss Cordero. I only want to understand what happened to your family." Elena paused, something unreadable passing across her features. "No one understands what happened. That's the point." She studied him for a long moment. "But if you're determined to die for a story, I'll take you there myself. First light tomorrow." As she left, the saloon remained silent. The bartender slid Blackwood's whiskey across the counter with a shaking hand. "You should know," he said quietly. "She's the only one who's gone back more than once and returned. Some folks say it's because whatever's in that valley already has a claim on her soul." That night, as Blackwood tried to sleep in the small room above the saloon, he could swear he heard something scratching at his window, though when he looked, there was nothing there but the vast emptiness of the New Mexico sky, unnaturally devoid of stars above the distant valley. Dawn broke with reluctant fingers of pale light reaching across the eastern horizon as Blackwood met Elena Cordero at the edge of town. She sat astride a sturdy mare, leading a second horse for him. No words were exchanged as he mounted, following her lead away from Tierra Seca and into the vast expanse of desert scrubland. The silence between them stretched for miles, broken only by the rhythmic sound of hooves against hard-packed earth and the occasional cry of a distant hawk. Elena rode with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the harsh landscape, her posture rigid, eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "How long has it been since you lived in the valley?" Blackwood finally asked, guiding his horse alongside hers as the terrain allowed. 10 years, she replied without looking at him. "I was 19 when it happened. And what exactly did happen?" Elena's jaw tightened visibly. "That's what everyone wants to know, isn't it? The famous Cordero family mystery." Her voice carried a bitter edge. "My father, mother, 2 sisters, brother, and uncle all gone within a single night. The only one found was Miguel, my youngest brother. He was 7. The bartender mentioned he doesn't speak. He hasn't said a word since that night. The doctor in Santa Fe called it traumatic mutism." She glanced sideways at Blackwood. "But he communicates in other ways." The drawings? Elena nodded, guiding her horse around a rocky outcropping. Always the same images. The valley, the house, and the darkness beneath it. By midday, the terrain had begun to change. The barren flatlands gave way to increasingly rocky ground, rising gradually toward a range of weathered mountains. A narrow pass opened between two towering mesas, and Elena slowed her horse. "We're getting close," she said, her voice noticeably tighter. "The valley lies just beyond this canyon." The passage between the rock walls was cool and shadowed, a welcome respite from the relentless sun. But as they progressed, Blackwood noticed that the natural sounds of the desert, the insects, the wind, the occasional call of birds had fallen completely silent. The only sound was the hollow echo of their horses' hooves against stone. "It's always quiet here," Elena said, answering his unspoken observation. "Animals avoid this place. Smart ones, anyway." The canyon widened suddenly, opening onto a vista that made Blackwood pull his horse to a stop. Below them lay a valley that seemed almost impossibly green amid the surrounding desert, a stretch of land perhaps 3 miles across. Cradled between rising slopes, a small river snaked through its center, and near the northern edge stood the remains of what must once have been a substantial homestead, a main house, a barn, and several outbuildings, now weathered and partially reclaimed by the encroaching wilderness. "Cordero Valley," Elena announced flatly. "Claimed by my father in 1874. He said it was the most fertile land he'd ever seen." She urged her horse forward, down the slope toward the abandoned buildings. What he never questioned was why no one had claimed it before. As they descended, Blackwood felt a strange sensation, like a physical pressure against his skin. The air seemed thicker here, harder to breathe despite the abundant vegetation. He noticed that Elena's knuckles had whitened where she gripped her reins. "We'll make camp near the river," she said, "but not near the house. Never near the house after dark." They dismounted by a bend in the river, some quarter-mile from the homestead. As Elena tended to the horses, Blackwood removed his notebook and began sketching the layout of the valley, making preliminary notes. "Did the authorities conduct a thorough investigation?" he asked as Elena returned. The territorial marshal came. "Found nothing. No blood, no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the valley." She began gathering wood for a fire. It was as if they simply vanished while sitting down to dinner. Food still on their plates, doors locked from the inside. "And Miguel? Found him the next morning, hiding in the root cellar, covered in dirt." Eyes changed. She paused, her face troubled. That's when he stopped speaking. As the sun began its descent toward the western rim of the valley, Blackwood noticed something peculiar about the quality of light. It seemed to fade more quickly here, shadows stretching and deepening with unnatural speed. Elena worked with increasing urgency to establish their camp. "We should have a fire going before full dark," she said, her voice tight. "You've been back here before," Blackwood observed. "Why?" Elena paused, looking toward the abandoned homestead now shrouded in lengthening shadows. "Because I still hear them calling me home in my dreams," she whispered. "And because I promised Miguel I would find out what happened to our family." As darkness fell completely over the valley, Blackwood could have sworn he heard something moving in the tall grass beyond their campfire's light. Sound like dry scales sliding against dried leaves. Elena's head snapped up, her body tensing as she reached for the rifle propped beside her. "It's starting," she murmured. "Whatever you do, Mr. Blackwood, don't leave the light of the fire. Not until morning comes." Morning arrived with unsettling abruptness, as though night had been suddenly switched off rather than gradually yielding to dawn. Blackwood awoke with a jolt, disoriented and with no memory of having fallen asleep. The fire had burned down to embers, and Elena was already awake, her red-rimmed eyes suggesting she'd had little rest. "You fell asleep mid-sentence last night," she said, noticing his confusion. "It happens to everyone their first night in the valley." Blackwood frowned, trying to recall their conversation. The last thing he remembered was asking Elena about the strange sounds in the darkness. Then nothing. He checked his journal and found an entry he had no recollection of writing, a series of disconnected phrases. "They move under the earth. The house breathes. 7 plates set for dinner. We'll explore the homestead today," Elena announced, rising to her feet. "It's safe enough in daylight." They approached the main house with caution, Elena leading the way with her rifle cradled in her arms. The 2-story structure had once been impressive, a testament to the prosperity the fertile valley had briefly provided the Cordero family. Now, weathered by a decade of abandonment, it stood as a hollow monument to tragedy. The front door hung partially open, swaying slightly in a breeze that Blackwood couldn't feel. The hinges gave a tortured groan as Elena pushed it wider, allowing watery sunlight to spill into the entrance hall. "Everything's exactly as it was," she murmured. No one from town would come to collect their belongings. They said the place was cursed. Blackwood followed her inside, the floorboards creaking beneath their weight. A fine layer of dust covered everything, yet somehow less than one would expect after a decade. The air felt strangely preserved, carrying the faint scent of food long since rotted away. The dining room confirmed Elena's account from the night before. 7 places were still set at the large oak table, tarnished silverware laid out beside cracked and empty plates. 7 chairs positioned as if their occupants had simply stepped away momentarily. They were having dinner, Elena said softly. It was Miguel's birthday, April 17th, 1879. Blackwood moved closer to the table, studying the scene. "No signs of struggle," he observed. "They just vanished during the meal?" Elena nodded. Marshall found Miguel the next morning in the root cellar. Door was locked from the inside. He was changed. Changed how? Like something had hollowed him out and only partially filled him back in. Her voice had taken on a distant quality. His eyes were different. Like he was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. They moved through the house methodically, the kitchen with its rusted utensils and ancient cast-iron stove. The parlor where a set of children's toys lay abandoned mid-play. The study where Mr. Cordero had kept his records and correspondence. My father was the first to notice something wasn't right about the valley, Elena explained as Blackwood examined the ledger still open on the desk. The livestock would go missing. Strange noises at night. But the land was so fertile he refused to leave. Blackwood flipped through the journal, noting the increasingly erratic handwriting in the final entries. The last, dated April 16, 1879, read simply, "They are under the house now. God forgive me for bringing my family here." "What did he mean by they?" Blackwood asked. Elena shook her head. "I don't know. But Miguel's drawings always show the same thing. Dark shapes moving beneath the earth." They climbed the creaking stairs to the second floor, where 4 bedrooms branched off from a central landing. Each room told its own story of interrupted lives' clothes still hanging in wardrobes. Personal items arranged on dressers, beds left unmade or meticulously tucked, depending on their owner's habits. "This was my room," Elena said, pausing at the threshold of the smallest bedroom. "I was staying in town that night. I had taken a job at the general store and sometimes slept in the room above it. Inside, the room of a 19-year-old girl stood frozen in time, a simple bed with a handmade quilt, a small vanity with a cracked mirror, books stacked on a nightstand." "That's why you survived," Blackwood realized. "Yes," she whispered, "because I wasn't home." The final room they entered belonged to Miguel. Unlike the others, this one showed signs of disturbance. Drawers pulled out, bed linens twisted and torn. A child's desperate attempt to hide or escape. On the walls, faded but still visible, were dozens of drawings made with what appeared to be charcoal. Crude, childish depictions of the house, the valley, and beneath it all, elongated black shapes with too many limbs, reaching upward through the earth. Blackwood stared at the images, a chill settling deep in his bones despite the warmth of the day. "These are the drawings he still makes?" Elena nodded. "The same images." Over and over. For 10 years, as they stood examining the disturbing artwork, a sound from below froze them both in place, the unmistakable scrape of a chair being moved across the dining room floor. Elena's knuckles whitened around her rifle. "We need to leave. Now." They descended the stairs cautiously, Elena leading the way with her weapon raised. The dining room, when they passed it, appeared undisturbed. Yet Blackwood would have sworn on his life that one of the chairs was now pushed back from the table at an angle different from before. Outside, the day had grown strangely darker, though it couldn't have been past noon. Heavy clouds had gathered over the valley, casting it in premature twilight. "We shouldn't have stayed this long," Elena said, her pace quickening as they headed back toward their camp. "The valley doesn't like being disturbed. You speak as if the place itself is alive," Blackwood observed, struggling to keep up with her. Elena stopped suddenly, turning to face him with an expression of grim certainty. "It's exactly what my father came to believe, Mr. Blackwood, that the valley is alive and hungry." As if in response to her words, a low, distant rumble emanated from somewhere beneath their feet, like the sound of the earth itself drawing a deep breath. The wind picked up as they returned to their campsite, carrying with it the scent of impending rain. Heavy clouds continued to gather above the valley, unnatural in their formations, whirling in a slow, circular pattern directly overhead. "We need to secure the horses and reinforce the camp," Elena said, eyeing the darkening sky with evident unease. "Storms here aren't natural." They worked quickly. Blackwood following Elena's lead and constructing a crude shelter from branches and the canvas she had brought. The horses grew increasingly agitated as the afternoon progressed, whinnying and pulling at their tethers. "Why did you really bring me here?" Blackwood asked as they huddled beneath the makeshift shelter, the first heavy drops of rain beginning to fall. "You could have refused, like everyone else in town." Elena was silent for a long moment, watching the rain intensify into sheets that obscured the homestead from view. "Because in 10 years I've found no answers on my own," she finally replied. "And Miguel is dying." Blackwood turned to her in surprise. "Dying? How?" "The doctor can't explain it. Says it's like his body is simply giving up. But I know the truth." Her eyes remained fixed on the distant, rain-shrouded house. "The valley is calling him back, just like it calls to me in my dreams. And you thought I'd find something you missed? I thought having a witness might make a difference." She turned to face him, her expression haunted. "Someone who could tell the world what happened here. If we survive." Thunder cracked overhead, a deafening boom that made the ground beneath them vibrate. The horses reared in panic, one breaking its tether and bolting into the curtain of rain, instantly lost from sight. "There's something I haven't shown you," Elena shouted over the storm. "Something in the cellar. We need to go back to the house now, and this?" Blackwood gestured at the deluge surrounding them. "The storm is part of it. It's always how it begins." She was already on her feet, gathering her rifle and a lantern. "We don't have much time before nightfall." They made their way back to the homestead, fighting against wind that seemed to push them in every direction except toward their destination. By the time they reached the house, they were soaked through, the temperature having dropped dramatically. Elena led him around to the back of the house, where a pair of slanted cellar doors lay flush against the ground. A heavy iron padlock secured them, new, incongruous against the weathered wood. "I put this here 5 years ago," she explained, producing a key from inside her shirt, where it hung on a cord around her neck. "To keep people out, or to keep something in." The lock opened with a reluctant click. Together they pulled the heavy doors upward, revealing a set of stone steps descending into darkness. The smell that rose from below was damp and mineral, like wet stone and old earth. Elena lit the lantern, its glow creating more shadows than illumination as they descended. The root cellar was larger than Blackwood had expected, extending well beyond the footprint of the house above. Stone walls gave way to packed earth as the main chamber branched into several tunnel-like extensions. "My father expanded it during their second year here," Elena explained, holding the lantern higher. "He said they needed more storage for the abundant harvests. But I think he found something while digging. Something he should have left buried." She led him to the farthest corner of the cellar, where the packed hearth floor gave way to exposed bedrock. At first, Blackwood saw nothing unusual, just natural stone formation. Then, as Elena lowered the lantern, he noticed markings in the rock, symbols carved in concentric circles around a central point where the stone dipped into a perfect, smooth depression about the size of a dinner plate. "These aren't Spanish or Native American," he said, crouching to examine the symbols more closely. "They look almost, I don't know, older somehow." "My father was educated, read ancient languages. I found references in his journal to something he called the Old Ones, who lived in this valley long before anyone else." Elena knelt beside the carved stone. "He believed this was some kind of door." Blackwood ran his fingers over the strange symbols. "A door to what?" "To whatever lives beneath the valley." As if in response to her words, a low vibration traveled through the stone, causing the lantern light to waver. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. "This is where they found Miguel," Elena continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "Curled up on this stone, covered in dirt, his fingers bloody from scratching at the symbols." Thunder boomed directly overhead, so powerful that the entire cellar seemed to shift. A fine crack appeared in the carved depression, spreading outward like a spider's web through the ancient stone. "It's happening again," Elena breathed, her face pale in the lantern light. The crack widened, and from within it came a sound, a dry, rasping whisper in no language Blackwood had ever heard. The air in the cellar grew suddenly cold, their breath fogging before them. "We need to leave. Now." Elena grabbed his arm, pulling him back toward the stairs. The whispers grew louder, seemingly coming from all directions at once. The lantern flickered violently, threatening to extinguish. As they reached the base of the stairs, Blackwood glanced back. The depression in the center of the carved stone had deepened, the crack now a gaping hole from which rose a darkness deeper than the absence of light, a blackness that seemed to absorb the very air around it. And within that darkness something moved. They scrambled up the stairs, the whispers rising to a crescendo behind them. As they burst through the cellar doors into the rain-lashed evening, a deep, resonant sound emanated from below, like the tolling of an immense bell, felt more than heard. "Run!" Elena screamed over the storm, pulling him toward the edge of the property. Behind them, the ground around the cellar doors began to sink, the earth collapsing inward as if being drawn down by an invisible force. Night fell with unnatural swiftness as they fled the homestead, the rain continuing to lash down in blinding sheets. Lightning split the sky in jagged arcs, illuminating the valley in brief. Stark flashes that transformed the familiar landscape into something alien and threatening. "We can't make it back to our camp," Elena shouted over the storm's fury. "We need shelter." She led Blackwood toward a small structure that stood some distance from the main house, a spring house built over one of the natural water sources that made the valley so unusually fertile. Its stone walls and sturdy construction offered their best hope of weathering the night. They forced the swollen wooden door open and stumbled inside. The single-room structure was dark and damp but solid, with a stone floor and a small fireplace built into one wall. Elena immediately began searching for anything to barricade the door while Blackwood struggled to light a fire with the few dry matches in his waterproof case. "Will this keep us safe?" he asked as the kindling finally caught, casting wavering shadows across the walls. Elena's laugh was brittle. "Nothing in this valley is safe after dark, but stone walls and fire are better than being out there." She nodded toward the small windows where rain lashed against the glass. "The darkness can't cross running waters, Lee. That's why my father built here, over a spring." As the fire grew stronger, Blackwood took stock of their shelter. The spring house was sparsely furnished. A few shelves holding dusty preserve jars, a small table, 2 chairs. In the center of the room, a circular stone basin collected the water that bubbled up from an underground spring before channeling it outside, through a narrow trough. "My mother used this place for canning and preserving," Elena explained, noting his examination. The constant cool temperature from the spring water was perfect for it. A particularly violent thunderclap shook the structure, causing dust and small debris to rain down from the ceiling. In its aftermath, a new sound became audible beneath the storm's chaos, a rhythmic, wet slithering that seemed to surround the spring house. Elena's face went pale. "They're coming." "What's coming?" Blackwood moved closer to the fire, an instinctive reaction to the sudden cold that permeated the room despite the flames. "I don't know what they are," she whispered, clutching her rifle. "No one who's seen them clearly has lived to describe them. Miguel's drawings are the closest thing to a record." The slithering sounds intensified, now accompanied by a soft scraping against the stone walls outside. The water in the spring basin began to ripple, though there was no apparent cause for the disturbance. "In his journal, my father wrote about dreams," Elena continued, her eyes fixed on the door. "Dreams of voices calling from beneath the earth, promising abundant harvests, prosperity, knowledge if only he would open the way." The carved stone in the cellar, Blackwood realized. "Your father didn't just find it. He activated it somehow." Elena nodded grimly. "The last entries suggest he performed some kind of ritual. He wrote about paying the price for paradise the next night." They all vanished. Something heavy struck the door, causing the wooden bar they'd placed across it to creak ominously. The fire flickered wildly, though there was no draft. Outside the windows, the darkness seemed to press against the glass like a living thing, obscuring even the lightning flashes. "They can't enter unless invited," Elena said, though her voice betrayed her uncertainty. "At least that's what I've always believed. It's why Miguel survived. He never invited them in." Another impact against the door, stronger this time. The wooden bar splintered slightly. The water in the basin began to churn, bubbling as if reaching a boil, though it remained ice-cold when Blackwood touched it. "And your family? They invited these things in?" "My father did," her voice broke. In his arrogance or his curiosity or his greed, I don't know which, but I think he realized his mistake too late. His final journal entry mentions trying to close what should never have been opened. The small windows suddenly blackened completely, as if covered by something on the outside. The slithering sounds were now directly overhead, moving across the roof with deliberate slowness. The fire dimmed despite Blackwood's efforts to maintain it, the flames turning an unnatural blue. "Mr. Blackwood," Elena said quietly, "if we don't survive until morning, you should know why I really brought you here." He turned to her, seeing the tears that now streaked her dirt-smudged face. "Miguel is dying because he's fighting against what's calling him back. I brought you here because I need someone to tell the world what happened." She drew a folded paper from inside her jacket and handed it to him, her hands trembling. "And to deliver this to the territorial governor if I don't return." Blackwood unfolded the document, a detailed map of the valley with the location of the carved stone clearly marked, accompanied by a letter requesting that the entire valley be sealed off permanently by dynamiting the passes if necessary. "You don't think this can be stopped?" "I think it can be contained," she replied. "The darkness is bound to this place somehow. If no one enters the valley—" Her words were cut short by a sound like cracking ice. The windows were frosting over from the outside in, intricate patterns spreading across the glass despite the warm season. Through the crystalline lattice, Blackwood caught glimpses of movement-elongated shapes sliding across the glass, leaving trails of frost in their wake. The bar across the door split with a loud crack. Both of them backed away, Elena raising her rifle, though her expression suggested it would be useless. The spring water had gone completely still, its surface now black and reflective like oil. "They're trying to find a way in," Elena whispered. "We need to." She never finished the sentence. The fire extinguished in a sudden, impossible downrush of air, plunging the spring house into total darkness. Blackwood fumbled desperately for matches, his hands shaking so badly he dropped the first two. As he struck the third match, its small flame illuminated a scene that would haunt him for the remainder of his days. The door still closed, but the water in the basin now rising upward in a column that twisted into an impossible shape, its surface rippling with what looked like hundreds of overlapping faces, each one a member of the Cordero family, their expressions frozen in silent screams. Elena made a strangled sound beside him, reaching toward the watery apparition. "Mother?" she whispered. The match went out. In the darkness, Blackwood heard Elena's breathing quicken, then stop altogether. There was a soft thud, like a body hitting the floor. When he finally managed to light another match, he was alone in the spring house. The door remained barred, the windows intact, the water basin empty and dry as bone. But Elena Cordero had vanished without a trace. Dawn arrived with merciful swiftness, the oppressive darkness giving way to pale light that filtered through the frost-covered windows of the spring house. Blackwood had spent the remainder of the night huddled in a corner, a guttering candle he'd found on a shelf, his only defense against the darkness. Sleep had been impossible, his mind replaying Elena's disappearance in an endless, horrifying loop. Now, as morning light strengthened, he cautiously approached the door. The wooden bar that had partially split during the night's assault was intact, showing no signs of the damage he clearly remembered. The spring basin remained dry, its stone bottom cracked and dusty as if it had held no water for years. Had he imagined it all? The evidence before his eyes contradicted his memories, yet the absence of Elena was undeniably real. With trembling hands, he removed the bar and pushed the door open. Outside, the valley looked transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a pristine landscape washed clean by the rain. No evidence remained of their frantic flight from the homestead, no footprints in the now muddy ground. It was as if the events of the previous night existed only in his mind. Blackwood stumbled toward their campsite, clinging to the hope that he might find Elena there, that perhaps she had somehow made her way back while he remained trapped in the spring house. But the camp was deserted, one horse still tethered and nervous, the other gone. Their supplies lay scattered by the storm, the canvas shelter collapsed. He checked his pocket watch, just past 6 in the morning. He had until nightfall to escape the valley. Gathering only the essentials, his journal, Elena's map and letter, what food remained undamaged, he mounted the surviving horse and set off toward the canyon that served as the valley's entrance. As he rode, Blackwood couldn't shake the sensation of being watched. The valley seemed different in ways he couldn't articulate. The colors too vivid, the air too still, the silence too complete. No birds sang, no insects buzzed among the lush vegetation. Quote, the very fertility that had lured the Cordero family now seemed sinister, as if the abundant life drew sustenance from something unwholesome beneath the surface. He paused at the homestead, drawn by a journalist's instinct to document everything despite his fear. The house stood as they had left it, yet somehow more foreboding in daylight. The ground around the cellar doors had indeed sunken, creating a noticeable depression as if something had collapsed underneath. Blackwood approached cautiously, compelled to verify that what he'd seen in the cellar was real. The padlock hung broken from the hasp, the doors themselves ajar. Steeling himself, he peered down into the darkness below. The cellar appeared normal at first, glanced stone walls, packed earth floor, the expected root storage areas. But as his eyes adjusted to the dimness, he noticed the far corner where the carved stone had been was now obscured by a cave-in. Earth and rock had collapsed, leaving a dark hole that extended downward at a steep angle, disappearing into blackness. Something glinted amid the rubble at the edge of the collapse. Descending a few steps, Blackwood retrieved a small object half buried in the dirt, a silver locket. He recognized it instantly as the one Elena had worn around her neck, the chain now broken. With shaking fingers, he opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph of the Cordero family, all 8 members posed formally in their Sunday best. On the opposite side, inscribed in delicate script, "Remember us." A faint whisper rose from the dark hole, the same sibilant sound he'd heard the night before. Blackwood stumbled backward up the stairs, slamming the cellar door shut behind him. He wedged a fallen branch through the handles, knowing even as he did so that it was a futile gesture against whatever dwelled below. Mounting his horse, he galloped toward the canyon pass, the animal seemingly as eager as he was to leave the valley behind. As they entered the narrow passage between the towering mesas, Blackwood glanced back one final time. In the clear morning light, the Cordero Valley looked like paradise green and fertile amid the surrounding desert, the homestead a picturesque frontier scene. Only the unnatural silence and the knot of dread in his stomach testified to the horror that lurked beneath its bucolic surface. He turned away, urging his horse faster through the canyon. He had a story to write, a warning to deliver, a promise to keep. The world needed to know about the Cordero Valley and what waited there, hungry in the darkness beneath. The sun had climbed high overhead by the time. Blackwood's exhausted horse carried him back to Tiarasica. The small settlement appeared unchanged, yet somehow more ominous in its dusty tranquility. As he dismounted outside the Broken Spoke saloon, he noticed how conversations ceased, and faces turned to watch him with expressions of surprise and suspicion. "You made it back," the bartender stated flatly as Blackwood entered, the words more accusation than welcome. "Alone, Elena Cordero is gone," Blackwood replied, his voice hoarse from thirst and fatigue. "Vanished like the others." A murmur rippled through the patrons. The older man who had warned him his first day rose from his chair, approaching slowly. "You've seen it, then? Whatever's in that valley?" It wasn't a question, but Blackwood nodded anyway. "I need to speak with Miguel Cordero." The saloon fell silent. The bartender exchanged glances with several others before responding. Miguel passed in the night. During the storm, Blackwood felt the blood drain from his face. "Last night? You're certain?" Doc was with him at the end, another man confirmed. Said the boy started screaming about sundown, drawing those pictures of his faster than ever before. Then just after midnight, he went still. Doc said it was like something just ... let go of him. The same time, Elena had disappeared. Blackwood clutched the bar for support, the implications settling over him like a physical weight. Where was he staying? "I need to see his drawings." The bartender seemed about to refuse, but the older man intervened. "He's earned that much, Thomas. Bringing back news when no one else has." They led him to a small house on the edge of town, where Tiarasica's doctor lived and practiced. The physician, a gray-haired man with tired eyes, greeted them solemnly. "You're the reporter who went to the valley with Elena," he said, recognition flickering across his weathered features. "I warned her not to go back. I need to see Miguel's drawings," Blackwood insisted. "The most recent ones." The doctor hesitated, then nodded. "This way." A small room at the back of the house had been Miguel's for the past decade. The space was spartanly furnished, but every available surface walls, ceiling, even sections of the floor was covered with drawings. Hundreds, perhaps thousands of charcoal sketches spanning years, the obsessive work of a traumatized mind trying to communicate what words could not. The earliest drawings were crude, childish depictions of the house, the valley, and dark shapes rising from below. But as Blackwood moved chronologically through the room, he saw the artwork evolve, becoming more detailed, more precise, more disturbing. He was getting better for a while, the doctor explained quietly. The drawings became less frequent. I hoped he might eventually speak again, but in the last month he deteriorated rapidly. The compulsion to draw returned stronger than ever. The most recent sketches covered a table in the center of the room, dozens of pages filled just in the previous day. Blackwood spread them out, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Unlike the earlier drawings focused on the valley and the darkness beneath, these depicted something new. A sprawling city of impossible architecture, structures that seemed to defy physics and geometry, stretching toward a sky filled with celestial bodies that were decidedly not Earth's familiar stars and moon. "What is this place?" Blackwood murmured, more to himself than the others. "He called it the home below," the doctor answered, the only words he ever wrote. And there, on the final sheet, Blackwood found what he'd been dreading. A recognizable human figure standing amid the alien cityscape. Elena Cordero. Her expression one of horror and wonder combined, a chain around her neck where her locket should have been. "These are dated," Blackwood noted, examining the corners of the pages. "Last night." How could he know? That's not the strangest part, the doctor interrupted. "Look at the time marked on each drawing." Blackwood checked and felt a chill run through him. The drawings were time-stamped, meticulously marked in 10-minute increments, and they began at exactly the moment Elena had disappeared from the spring house. He was drawing what she was seeing, Blackwood whispered, in real time. The doctor nodded grimly, and he kept drawing until his heart gave out. The final image was completed at 12:40 a.m., the exact moment of death. Blackwood examined the last drawing again. Behind Elena's figure stood 7 shadowy forms, their features indistinct except for their eyes, hollow, hungry voids that seemed to absorb light from the page itself. The Cordero family, watching their daughter's arrival in the home below. "There's something else you should see," the doctor said, retrieving a small wooden box from beneath Miguel's bed. He was clutching this when he died. We couldn't pry it from his fingers until after he passed. The box was carved with the same strange symbols Blackwood had seen on the stone in the cellar. Inside lay a folded piece of paper and a small object wrapped in cloth. The paper contained a message written in a child's unsteady hand. "Close the door. Salt the earth. Burn what remains." Blackwood unwrapped the cloth object and nearly dropped it in shock. It was a piece of the carved stone from the cellar, a fragment bearing several of the mysterious symbols, broken off from the main piece. "He brought this out with him 10 years ago, the doctor explained. Never let it out of his possession. Said it was the key that opened the door, and the only thing that could close it again." Blackwood carefully rewrapped the stone fragment, his mind racing. Elena's letter to the territorial governor proposed sealing off the valley completely, but what if there was another way? What if the door that had been opened could also be closed? He pocketed the fragment and gathered Miguel's final drawings. "I need to send a telegram to the Chicago Tribune," he announced, and then to the territorial governor in Santa Fe. The doctor caught his arm as he turned to leave. "You're not thinking of going back to that valley, are you?" Blackwood met the man's concerned gaze steadily. "Someone has to finish what the Corderos started. Someone has to close the door." As he stepped back into the harsh sunlight of Tierra Seca's main street, Blackwood felt the weight of Elena's locket in his pocket, heard the whispers from the cellar echoing in his memory, and knew with terrible certainty that his journey into the Cordero Valley was far from over. The telegraph operator in Tierra Seca looked at Blackwood with undisguised skepticism as he dictated his message to the Chicago Tribune. The story he'd composed was deliberately vague on details: strange disappearances, a family tragedy, a reporter's investigation, nothing that would strain credibility or reveal the true horror of what he'd witnessed. The second telegram to the territorial governor in Santa Fe was more direct, requesting immediate investigation of the Cordero Valley disappearances, citing potential dangers to public safety, and suggesting temporary restrictions on access to the area. He included his credentials and the Chicago Tribune's authority to lend weight to his appeal. "Might be 3 days before you get any response," the operator warned as he finished transcribing the messages. "Lines to Santa Fe have been troublesome since the storm." Blackwood nodded grimly. 3 days. The knowledge sat heavily upon him. 3 days before any official action might be taken, while whatever dwelled beneath the valley continued to stir. "Is there a library in town?" he asked. "Or anyone who might have books on local history, native legends?" The operator considered for a moment. "Old Father Ruiz at the Mission Church. He's been collecting local histories for 30 years. If anyone knows the valley's past, it'd be him." The Mission Church of San Miguel stood at the far end of town, a modest adobe structure with a small cemetery beside it. As Blackwood approached, he spotted an elderly priest tending to a garden of native plants that somehow thrived in the harsh desert conditions. "Father Ruiz?" he called. The old man straightened slowly, shading his eyes against the sun. "Yes, my son. How may I help you?" Blackwood introduced himself and explained his interest in the Cordero Valley, carefully omitting the more disturbing aspects of his experience. "I'm particularly interested in any historical records or native legends about the area." Father Ruiz studied him thoughtfully, his weathered face revealing nothing. "Come inside," he finally said. "There are things you should see." The interior of the church was cool and dim, a welcome respite from the relentless sun. Father Ruiz led him past the modest sanctuary to a small room at the rear that served as both office and library. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books, manuscripts, and rolled documents. "I've spent my life collecting the stories of this land," the priest explained, running a finger along the spines of leather-bound volumes. "The Spanish colonists, the Mexican settlers, the American pioneers, and those who were here long before any of us." He selected several items: a crumbling journal bound in faded leather, a portfolio of loose papers, and a clay tablet wrapped carefully in cloth. "The valley you ask about has many names," Father Ruiz began, laying the materials on his desk. "The Apache called it the place of hungry earth. Spanish explorers named it Valle de los Sombras, Valley of Shadows. The earliest Mexican settlers refused to farm there despite its fertility." He opened the journal, revealing pages filled with faded Spanish script. This belonged to Padre Domingo Vasquez, who traveled with the Coronado expedition in 1540. He wrote of a fertile valley where native guides refused to enter, claiming it was a doorway to the underworld. Blackwood leaned forward, examining the ancient text. His Spanish was rudimentary, but he could make out descriptions that matched the Cordero Valley with unsettling accuracy: the unusually lush vegetation amid desert terrain, the springs that bubbled up from deep underground, the unnatural silence that pervaded the place. Coronado's men camped there for 3 nights, Father Ruiz continued. On the 3rd night, 6 soldiers vanished without trace. Padre Vasquez described hearing voices from beneath the earth, speaking in a language not meant for human tongues. The priest next unfolded the portfolio, revealing sketches and notes in various hands spanning centuries. Others have documented similar experiences. In 1764, a Spanish mining expedition disappeared entirely. In 1821, shortly after Mexican independence, a family named Ortega attempted to settle there. They abandoned their homestead after 1 season, claiming their youngest children had begun speaking to those who lived below. Blackwood's throat had gone dry. And the Native Americans? What did they know about it? Father Ruiz carefully unwrapped the clay tablet. Its surface was etched with symbols that made Blackwood's breath catch the same markings he had seen on the stone in the Cordero cellar. This was found in 1856 by a U.S. Army survey party. The local tribes claimed it had been made by the Ancient Ones, who lived in this region before their ancestors arrived. The priest traced the concentric circles with a gnarled finger. They believed it depicted a doorway between worlds or world and another. They called the Deep Kingdom. Did anyone translate these symbols? Blackwood asked, thinking of the fragment in his pocket. Father Ruiz shook his head. Many have tried. The closest was a professor from back east who visited in 1872. He believed they represented a form of language predating all known human civilizations. 1872, Blackwood repeated. 2 years before Antonio Cordero claimed the valley. Yes. The priest's expression darkened. Cordero was an educated man. He and the professor corresponded extensively. I believe Cordero knew exactly what he was settling upon. But why? Why would he knowingly bring his family to such a place? Father Ruiz sighed deeply. The professor's theories suggested that the doorway, if properly opened, might grant access to knowledge and power beyond human understanding. Cordero was ambitious and perhaps arrogant enough to believe he could control whatever lay on the other side. Blackwood thought of Elena's words, paying the price for paradise. Antonio Cordero had made a bargain with something ancient and incomprehensible, a pact that ultimately claimed his entire family. Father Blackwood said carefully, "What if the doorway Cordero opens still exists? What if it could be closed?" The priest's eyes widened slightly. "You've seen it." It wasn't a question, but Blackwood nodded anyway. He withdrew the stone fragment from his pocket and placed it beside the clay tablet. The symbols matched perfectly. "Miguel Cordero had this when he died last night," he explained. "He left a message. Close the door. Salt the earth. Burn what remains." Father Ruiz crossed himself. The boy knew more than he could say. He studied the fragment intently. This piece. It appears to be part of the central locking mechanism. The professor's notes suggested that the doorway required specific components to function, like a key and a lock. So replacing this fragment might seal the doorway. Perhaps. The priest sounded doubtful. But the risks would be enormous. Whatever has been awakened in that valley has grown stronger with each soul it has claimed. The Cordero family. Now Elena. It will not surrender its connection to our world easily. Blackwood felt the weight of Elena's locket in his other pocket. "I made a promise to bring her story to light, to warn others." "And you have," Father Ruiz said gently. "The telegrams are sent. The authorities will come. Let them handle what remains." But even as the priest spoke, Blackwood knew he couldn't leave matters unresolved. The territorial governor might seal off the valley, might prevent more victims from stumbling into the darkness, but the doorway would remain open. The hunger beneath would continue to grow, and Elena Cordero, like her family before her, would remain trapped in the home below. "I need to return to the valley," Blackwood stated, his decision crystallizing. "Tonight, before whatever's happening there grows stronger." Father Ruiz studied him for a long moment, then nodded gravely. "Then you will need help." He rose and moved to a cabinet in the corner, unlocking it with a key from around his neck. From within, he withdrew a small wooden box. "The professor left these with me before he departed for the east," the priest explained, opening the box to reveal several items: a small silver flask, a leather pouch, and a folded paper covered in handwritten notes. "Holy water, blessed salt, and instructions for a ritual of closing," Father Ruiz identified each item. He believed that what dwells beneath the valley predates Christianity, predates all human religion, but still adheres to certain universal principles of sacred space and boundary. Blackwood accepted the box, a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope churning within him. He was a journalist, a man of facts and evidence, not mysticism. Yet after what he had witnessed in the valley, he could no longer dismiss such things outright. "One more thing," Father Ruiz added. "Whatever happens, you must be clear of the valley before midnight." The professor's note suggests that the boundary between worlds is thinnest at that hour. "If you remain ... double quotes, he left the warning unfinished. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Blackwood prepared for what he knew might be his final journey. He acquired supplies, lanterns, rope, weapons that would likely prove useless, and a fresh horse from the livery stable. The townsfolk watched his preparations with a mixture of respect and pity. None offered to accompany him, but neither did they try to dissuade him. They understood, as perhaps only those who lived in the shadow of the valley could, that some mysteries demanded resolution regardless of the cost. As he mounted his horse and turned toward the canyon pass, the setting sun painted the distant mountains in shades of blood and gold. He had until midnight to confront whatever waited in the darkness beneath the Cordero Valley, to close a door that should never have been opened, to fulfill a promise made to a woman now lost between worlds. Thomas Blackwood, journalist and skeptic, urged his horse forward into the gathering dusk, the weight of Elena's locket against his heart and the fragment of ancient stone like a burning coal in his pocket. Twilight had deepened into true night by the time Blackwood reached the canyon entrance to Cordero Valley. Unlike his first approach with Elena, when the passage had been merely silent and foreboding, now it seemed actively hostile. The wind that funneled through the narrow space carried whispers just below the threshold of comprehension, and the rock walls themselves appeared to undulate slightly in the moonlight as if breathing. His horse balked at the entrance, refusing to proceed despite his urging. After several futile attempts, Blackwood dismounted and secured the animal to a stunted pine that grew from a crevice in the canyon wall. He would continue on foot. "I'll return by midnight," he told the nervous beast, though he wondered if either of them believed it. The journey through the canyon seemed longer this time, the path twisting in ways he didn't recall from before. Blackwood kept one hand on the rock wall for guidance, the other clutching a lantern that cast more shadows than light. Father Ruiz's wooden box was secured in his satchel, along with Elena's locket and Miguel's stone fragment. When the canyon finally opened onto the valley, Blackwood stopped short, momentarily disoriented. The landscape before him had changed subtly but unmistakably. The valley floor undulated in gentle rises and falls that he was certain hadn't existed 2 days earlier, the pattern reminiscent of the concentric circles carved into the ancient stone. The river that bisected the valley no longer followed a natural course but curved in a deliberate spiral, converging toward the Cordero homestead at the center. Most disturbing, however, was the light. Though no moon was visible above, the sky void of absolute blackness, the valley glowed with a faint luminescence that seemed to emanate from the earth itself, pulsing in slow, rhythmic waves like a vast, subterranean heartbeat. Blackwood checked his pocket watch. 9:17 p.m. Less than 3 hours until midnight. He began the descent into the valley, keeping to the shadows where possible, though he suspected concealment was futile. The place knew he was here. He could feel its awareness like a physical pressure against his skin. As he approached the homestead, he was struck by how the building had deteriorated in the mere day since he'd last seen it. The structure leaned at an impossible angle, yet remained standing. Walls bowed outward as if something pushed from within. Windows that had been intact now gaped like hungry mouths. Glass shattered inward. The ground around the cellar doors had collapsed further, creating a crater some 15 feet across. The doors themselves hung from a single hinge, revealing the stairway that now descended at a much steeper angle than before, disappearing into absolute darkness despite the strange luminescence that pervaded the rest of the valley. Blackwood paused at the edge of the crater, steeling himself for what lay ahead. He withdrew the wooden box from his satchel, examining its contents one final time. The flask of holy water, the pouch of blessed salt, the professor's handwritten instructions. The ritual, as described, was simple enough. Place the missing fragment back into the carved stone, forming a complete circle, then consecrate it with the water and salt while reciting a specific Latin phrase. The professor's notes claimed this would reset the boundary and seal the threshold, though they also warned of potential resistance from the other side. Taking a deep breath, Blackwood began his descent into the cellar. The stairs creaked ominously beneath his weight, several breaking entirely, forcing him to proceed with agonizing slowness. The air grew colder with each step, his breath fogging before him despite the warm night above. At the bottom he raised his lantern, its light revealing a space transformed beyond recognition. The root cellar's original walls remained partially intact, but the floor had collapsed entirely, opening into a vast chamber that could not have existed beneath a simple frontier homestead. The chamber extended far beyond the lantern's reach, its dimensions suggesting a space larger than the valley itself, a geographical impossibility that made Blackwood's mind recoil. Pillars of raw stone rose from the darkness below, carved with the same symbols as the tablet, each glowing with a faint blue luminescence. And there, at the center of it all, stood the carved stone, no longer a simple circular depression in the bedrock, but a raised dais some 10 feet across, its surface now completely covered in the arcane symbols that spiraled toward a central void. The fragment in Blackwood's pocket burned with sudden cold, causing him to gasp in pain. When he withdrew it, the piece glowed with the same blue light as the pillars, pulsing in time with the distant heartbeat of the valley above. A sound rose from the void at the center of the dais, the now familiar whispers, but clearer than before, almost comprehensible. Blackwood forced himself forward, fighting against an invisible pressure that grew stronger with each step toward the stone. The edge of the dais stood nearly chest-high. Blackwood placed his lantern in the wooden box on its surface, then heaved himself up with trembling arms. The stone was ice-cold beneath his hands, vibrating slightly like a tuning fork struck by some unimaginable force. From this vantage he could see that the central void was not empty as he had first thought. Within it swirled a darkness deeper than the absence of light, a blackness that seemed to absorb not just illumination but reality itself, a window into a place where the laws of nature held no meaning. And within that impossible darkness shapes moved. Elongated forms twisted and flowed like smoke given partial substance, their movements suggesting anatomies no earthly creature could possess. Here and there Blackwood caught glimpses of features that approximated human, a hand with too many fingers, a mouth stretched beyond possible width, eyes that reflected nothing because they consumed all. The whispers intensified, coalescing into a single voice that seemed to bypass his ears entirely, speaking directly into his mind. "You have returned, as we knew you would." Blackwood recoiled, nearly losing his balance on the edge of the dais. The voice was neither male nor female, neither young nor old, a chorus of thousands speaking as one, their tones ranging from the deepest bass to the highest shrill, creating a dissonant harmony that set his teeth on edge. "Who are you?" he managed to ask, his own voice sounding thin and insignificant in the vast chamber. "We are the first ones, the dwellers below, the waiting ones." The titles rolled forth like an ancient liturgy. "We were here before your kind crawled from the ocean. We will remain when your cities are dust. What have you done with the Cordero family, with Elena?" A sound like laughter rippled through the darkness, though it held no mirth. "They are with us now, part of us, as you will be." As if in response to these words, shapes began to coalesce more distinctly within the void, human figures forming from the swirling darkness, their features gradually resolving into recognizable faces. The Cordero family, arranged as if for a portrait, their expressions blank and their eyes nothing but empty sockets of absolute blackness. And at the center stood Elena, her form more substantial than the others. Her features locked in the same expression of horror and wonder that Miguel had captured in his final drawing. Around her neck, the silver locket caught the blue light, the only object that seemed truly solid in that phantasmal gathering. "Elena," Blackwood called, his voice breaking. "I've come to help you." To close the doorway. Her lips moved, but it was the chorus voice that emerged. "There is no escape from the deep kingdom. Only joining. Only becoming." Blackwood forced himself to look away from her face, to focus on the task at hand. The void at the center of the dais had a specific shape, a perfect negative of the fragment in his pocket. He withdrew it carefully, its glow now pulsating rapidly. "The threshold between worlds thins," the voice observed. "Midnight approaches in your realm. The door will open fully. We will rise. We will feast. Not if I close it first." Blackwood reached for the wooden box, retrieving the flask of holy water and the pouch of salt. The laughter came again, colder this time. "Your trinkets are meaningless here. Your rituals powerless. The professor learned this truth before we took him." This revelation staggered Blackwood. The professor had never returned east as Father Ruiz believed. He had been the first victim of whatever dwelled beneath the valley, the price Antonio Cordero had paid for his paradise. But the fragment in his hand still glowed, still pulsed with power. Whatever else might be true, this piece belonged in the void. It was the key, or perhaps the lock, to the doorway between worlds. Blackwood knelt at the edge of the void, the fragment clutched tightly in his fist. The darkness within seemed to reach for him, tendrils of absolute blackness extending outward like grasping fingers. "Elena," he called again. "If you can hear me, the real you, I need your help. You know this place. You understand what has to be done." For an instant, something flickered across her spectral face, a flash of awareness, of recognition. Her hand moved to the locket at her throat, fingers closing around it in a gesture that seemed independent of the will controlling the rest of her form. The locket, Blackwood realized suddenly. It's anchoring you here, isn't it? A connection to your family, to this world? The chorus voice hissed in displeasure. The tendrils of darkness withdrew slightly, coiling like serpents preparing to strike. Blackwood acted on instinct, reaching into his pocket for the identical locket he had found in the cellar. He held it up before the void, its silver surface catching the blue light. "Remember us," he quoted the inscription inside. "Remember who you are, Elena." Her spectral form shuddered. The blackness of her eyes receded slightly, revealing a flash of human iris beneath. Her lips moved again, but this time a single strained word emerged in her own voice. "Now." Blackwood didn't hesitate. He plunged his hand into the void, feeling an impossible cold that burned like fire, and pressed the stone fragment into place. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The dais shuddered violently, the blue glow intensifying to blinding brilliance. The chorus voice rose to a deafening shriek of rage and pain. The spectral forms of the Cordero family dispersed like smoke in a high wind. All except Elena remained fixed in place, her hand still clutching the locket at her throat. "The water and salt," she gasped, her voice stronger now. "Complete the ritual." Blackwood fumbled with the flask, pouring its contents into the void where they hissed and steamed upon contact. He followed with the blessed salt, scattering it in a circle around the now complete stone. From the folded paper he read the Latin phrase in a voice that gained strength with each syllable. The chamber began to collapse around them, massive chunks of stone falling from the ceiling as the pillars cracked and toppled. The void at the center of the dais contracted, the darkness within writhing in apparent agony. "It's working," Blackwood shouted over the cacophony of destruction. "Elena, we need to live now." Her spectral form had begun to fade, growing transparent as the connection between worlds weakened. "I can't," she replied, her voice already distant. "I'm bound to them now. To this place, no." Blackwood reached for her, his hand passing through her insubstantial form. "There must be a way." Elena's face softened into a sad smile. "There is, but not for me." She removed the locket from around her neck, holding it out to him. Somehow, impossibly, the object maintained physical form as it passed from her spectral hand to his solid one. "Tell our story," she whispered, as her image began to disperse. "Make sure no one ever opens this door again." The chamber shuddered once more, the ceiling giving way entirely as the void contracted to a pinpoint of absolute darkness, then vanished with a sound like thunder. The blue glow extinguished instantly, leaving Blackwood in total darkness save for his guttering lantern. He scrambled to his feet, snatching up the lantern and leaping from the collapsing dais. The original cellar stairs had completely disappeared, leaving only rubble and broken earth. Blackwood clawed his way upward, driven by instinct and desperation as the space behind him filled with falling stone and suffocating dust. When he finally broke through to the surface, gasping for air, he found the homestead completely gone collapsed into the growing sinkhole that had replaced the cellar. The ground continued to shift and settle beneath him, forcing him to scramble away toward higher ground, from the relative safety of a small rise. Blackwood turned to witness the final moments of the Cordero homestead's destruction. The sinkhole widened, consuming outbuildings and corrals before finally stabilizing as a perfect circular depression some 50 yards across, and then silence. The unnatural luminescence had faded from the valley floor. The river had returned to its natural course. The air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. Blackwood checked his pocket watch with shaking hands. 11:58 p.m., 2 minutes to midnight. As if in response to this realization, a low rumble began at the edges of the valley. Not from below this time, but from above. The canyon walls that formed the valley's borders were shifting, massive sections of stone breaking free and tumbling downward. The valley was closing itself. Blackwood ran, his lungs burning and legs threatening to buckle as he raced toward the canyon entrance. Behind him, the avalanche continued, filling the valley floor with tons of rock and earth, burying whatever secrets remained beneath. He reached his horse just as the final section of canyon wall collapsed, sealing the entrance to Cordero Valley forever. The animal was frantic with fear but responded to his desperate commands, carrying him away from the destruction at a breakneck pace. Only when they had put several miles between themselves and the former entrance did Blackwood allow himself to slow, to breathe, to contemplate what had occurred. In his pocket he carried Elena's locket and the professor's notes, the only tangible evidence of what had transpired. In his mind, he carried the truth of the Cordero Valley and the horror that had dwelled beneath it, a truth few would believe. But that must never be forgotten. As dawn broke over the New Mexico territory, Thomas Blackwood turned his horse toward Tierra Seca, toward the telegraph office, toward the world of the living. He had a story to write, a warning to deliver, a promise to keep. The mystery of the Cordero family would never be solved to the satisfaction of history. But the doorway beneath their valley, the threshold between worlds that should never have been opened, was closed once more. And if, in the years that followed, Thomas Blackwood sometimes woke in the night to the sound of distant whispers, or found himself drawing strange circular symbols he did not consciously remember seeing, well, such was the price of his journey into darkness. Some doors, once glimpsed, leave their mark upon the soul, even when they are finally mercifully closed. The offices of the Chicago Tribune hummed with activity as Thomas Blackwood sat at his desk staring at the final paragraph of his article. After 3 months, numerous revisions, and lengthy debates with his editors, the mystery of Cordero Valley was finally ready for publication, though not in the form Blackwood had originally intended. Gone were the references to voices beneath the earth, spectral apparitions, and doorways between worlds. In their place stood a more palatable narrative, a frontier family disappearing under mysterious circumstances, possibly due to territorial disputes or natural disaster. A brave sister returning a decade later to search for answers. A tragic ending when flash floods and landslides claimed her life and sealed the valley permanently. The truth remained buried, both literally beneath tons of rock and figuratively between the lines of his sanitized account. Only in his private journals did Blackwood record what he had actually witnessed, journals he kept locked in a fireproof safe in his Chicago apartment alongside Elena's locket. Blackwood, his editor's voice cut through his reverie. "Got a telegram for you, from New Mexico territory." Blackwood accepted the envelope with a mixture of curiosity and dread. He had maintained correspondence with Father Ruiz since leaving Tierra Seca, but the priest's letters had dwindled in recent months. The message was brief, but its impact profound. Strange reports from mining settlement 30 miles east of former Cordero Valley stop locals hearing. Voices from new mine shafts stop unusual fertility and surrounding soil stop symbols matching your drawings found carved in stone. "Stop, please advise, stop." Father Ruiz Blackwood's hand trembled as he set the telegram down. He opened his desk drawer, withdrawing a small notebook filled with copies he had made of Miguel's drawings. Flipping to the final pages, the ones depicting the alien cityscape Elena had witnessed, he noticed something he had overlooked before. In the background of several drawings, beyond the impossible architecture of the home below, rose a mountain range with a distinctive profile, a profile that matched the mountains east of Cordero Valley. The door had closed, but perhaps the darkness had found another way through. Blackwood glanced at the completed article on his desk, the sanitized version of events that would do nothing to warn of the true danger. With sudden resolve, he crumpled the pages and began again, writing rapidly, his pen nearly tearing the paper in his urgency. The Cordero warning. A journalist's encounter with unimaginable horror in the New Mexico territory. Let the editors object. Let the public scoff. Some warnings had to be delivered, regardless of the cost to one's reputation or career. Some truths were too important to conceal, even when cloaked in the language of sensational journalism. As he wrote, Blackwood felt the familiar weight of Elena's locket against his chest, where he had taken to wearing it beneath his shirt. Sometimes at night he imagined it grew warm, pulsating like the blue glow of the stone fragment. Sometimes he thought he could hear Elena's voice, distorted as if traveling across a vast distance, repeating her final request, "Tell our story. Make sure no one ever opens this door again." In his apartment that evening, Blackwood packed a small traveling case. The new article would be published. His editor had reluctantly agreed after reading the powerful, if fictionalized, account. But Blackwood would not be in Chicago to witness its reception. The telegram from Father Ruiz demanded a response more substantial than words on paper. The locket seemed to grow heavier against his skin as he considered what might lie ahead. He had closed one door at tremendous cost. Now it seemed another had opened, or was in the process of opening. Before leaving his apartment, Blackwood paused at the fireproof safe, retrieving his journals and the professor's notes on the closing ritual. He hesitated, then added one more item, a small pouch of blessed salt Father Ruiz had given him upon his departure from Tierra Seca. "Just in case," the priest had said with knowing eyes. "Some boundaries may need reinforcement." As Blackwood locked his apartment and headed for the train station, The weight of responsibility settled over him like a physical burden. He had survived his encounter with the darkness beneath Cordero Valley, had helped seal away an ancient horror, but at what cost? Elena remained lost between worlds. Miguel had died trying to communicate the truth. The Cordero family would never truly rest. And now, if Father Ruiz's telegram was correct, the cycle was beginning again. Another valley, another threshold, another community unaware of the hunger that waited just beneath the surface of reality. Thomas Blackwood, once a skeptical journalist seeking only a compelling story, now found himself a reluctant guardian of terrible knowledge. As the train pulled away from Chicago's crowded station, he opened his journal and made a final entry. I returned to New Mexico not as a reporter but as a witness. What dwells beneath the earth is ancient beyond reckoning and patient beyond mortal understanding. The Cordero Valley is sealed, but the hunger that waited there has found new paths to our world. I carry with me the means to close this new doorway, though I cannot know if I will survive a second encounter with the darkness. Elena's sacrifice must not be in vain. The warning must be heeded. Some places are not meant for human settlement, some discoveries not meant for human knowledge. The fertile valleys that appear too perfect, too abundant amid barren landscapes, these are not gifts of providence, but lures set by things that feed on human curiosity and ambition. Should I not return from this journey, let these journals serve as testimony and warning. The boundaries between worlds grow thin in certain places. What waits beyond hungers for passage into our realm, and once invited, it never truly leaves. He closed the journal, watching the Midwestern landscape roll past his window. In his pocket, Elena's locket seemed to pulse with a warning heat. In his mind, the whispers that had haunted his dreams since leaving New Mexico grew louder, more insistent. The darkness had found another door, and Thomas Blackwood, perhaps alone among the living, possessed the knowledge to close it. As the train carried him westward toward a fate he could not fully envision, Blackwood's determination hardened into resolve. He would complete what the Cordero family had begun. He would honor Elena's final request. He would ensure that the warning was delivered and heeded, whatever the cost.